Hello, my name is Jierra, and I've made this video for you not as an expert in this field, but as a concerned citizen. I am a professional singer and a human rights advocate. Because of these two things combined, I am honored to attend lots of different events and to spend time with many experts in many fields. This video and information is concerning the link between antidepressant drugs and the perpetrators of mass shootings. Oftentimes, after a high-profile, tragic mass shooting, Congress acts to increase gun control, where I believe we should be calling for more investigation on the link between these antidepressant drugs and their dangerous side effects. A key factor is that the vast majority of mass shootings in the last several decades have been perpetrated by those on or withdrawing from psychotropic antidepressant drugs. To give you more information on this topic, there is a very thorough report called the Violence Report. Before getting into this report, I'd like to go over the definitions of some words that will be used throughout this report called psychotropic drugs. A psychoactive drug, psychopharmaceutical, psychoactive agent, or psychotropic drug is a chemical substance that changes the function of the nervous system and results in alterations of perception, mood, cognition, and behavior. They are taken to exert an effect on the chemical makeup of the brain and nervous system. Thus, these medications are used to treat mental illnesses, and those are from Wikipedia. Another term that you'll see in this report is SSRI, which is a specific type of antidepressant. It stands for Selective Serotonin Reuptake Inhibitors. Okay, so serotonin is a very key chemical in the brain. A description of SSRIs is: after carrying a message, serotonin is usually reabsorbed by the nerve cells. This is known as reuptake. SSRIs work by blocking or inhibiting reuptake, meaning more serotonin is available to pass further messages between cells nearby. And here is some literature from PSYCHIATRISTS.com stating the effects of SSRIs are not fully known. It states, moreover, the side effects profile of SSRIs provided in the drug manufacturer's package inserts are derived from company-sponsored studies that have been reviewed by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, and usually fail to capture the side effect profiles of SSRIs in the real world. 2. The dosages used in early clinical trials may not be sufficient to allow for a full understanding of the side effect profiles of SSRIs. So now that we've got that cleared up, here's a PDF link of the Violence Report for you. The very cover of this report says psychiatric drugs create violence and suicide. One of the very first quotes is as follows: as a veteran police officer, I found this report a vital resource for all in law enforcement. The statistics in this report are staggering, and the studies and expert opinion cannot be ignored. It is an important resource that needs to be made broadly available to our law enforcement community, our military, and government officials. And that is from a 29-year U.S. law enforcement professional. Page 2 of the Violence Report is entitled Violence, Psychotropic Drugs Best Kept Secret. I urge you to go over this entirely, but I will cite a few references. On page 5, the top reads, of 409 official psychiatric drug warnings, and then we have on here, violence, mania, psychosis, hostility, aggression, or homicidal ideation, which means thoughts of homicide. You have suicide or suicidal ideation. On page 13, it is entitled Reports to FDA's MedWatch System on Violent Adverse Effects Linked to Psychotropic Drugs. And again, you have homicidal ideation, homicide, hostility, physical assault, psychosis, violence-related symptoms, aggression, mania, and below that, International Drug Agency warnings on violence. Again, you have hostility, mania, psychosis or psychotic episodes, agitation, aggression, violent behavior or violence, homicidal ideation. Page 14 is literally entitled School Shootings, the Missing Link. On page 28 and 29, you have photos of violent killers that were on or withdrawing from psychotropic drugs. And here's the thing, a vast majority of mass shootings have been perpetrated by those on or withdrawing from psychotropic drugs. I urge more investigation between these drugs and these violent acts. For example, we should call to release the medical and psychiatric records so that they can be investigated and compiled, including the autopsy reports, to see which drugs were in these people's people's systems. Another phenomenal reference is called SSRIstories.org. This site has thousands and thousands of stories linking aggression, violence, rage, homicide, murder-suicide, and these drugs. I strongly advise you to look through this site. Furthermore, on the topic of dangerous effects of these drugs, here's a clip out of a 4-minute, 40-second video by constitutional attorney Jonathan EMORD.
1 in 5 people, I believe, if not even higher than that, is on some sort of psychoactive drug in the United States. That is very chilling when you realize the adverse effects associated with these drugs and the number of people that must be experiencing those adverse effects, which include predisposition towards suicide, predisposition towards violence. Is it perhaps the case that when we're giving 1 in 5 people these drugs and the effects are admitted by the FDA, shouldn't we expect aberrant behavior to be cropping up all over the nation? It's striking that there isn't outrage in the government and in the medical community over the fact that over a majority of those who have committed these school shootings have been on drugs, psychiatric drugs. And these psychiatric drugs are the very ones that the FDA admits increase the risk of suicide and violent behavior.
It is apparent and often mentioned that there is a mental health crisis going on in this country, normally with cries for more mental health care and larger budgets. But this crisis is not for a lack of either of these things, because the mental health care budgets have soared to an exorbitant tens of billions of dollars annually, while SSRI prescriptions have reached approximately 45 million Americans. And yet, suicide, mass shootings, depression are all steadily increasing. And by the way, when it is noted that all of these mass shooters clearly needed mental health attention, keep in mind they were all receiving mental health care in the form of psychiatric treatment and psychiatric drugs. I think this entire area should be investigated and overhauled, because we clearly have a very broken mental health care system that is not decreasing the rate of depression, suicide, mass shootings, and more. I think it's also very important to note here that, as mentioned above, approximately 45 million people are on SSRIs. And of course, they are not all exhibiting signs of violence by any means. But these studies have proven that some who were not violent before taking these drugs became violent after being on them. So again, more investigation on that link is warranted. In many documents, it is found that these psychotropic drugs are used as the first line of treatment, though there are many studies and reports indicating that a large percentage of antidepressant users don't have an effect beyond placebo effect. And here is a whole list of references regarding those studies, including 85% of antidepressant users don't have an effect beyond placebo effect. Meta-analysis of FDA trials suggest that antidepressants are only marginally efficacious compared to placebos and document profound publication bias that inflates their apparent efficacy. Rate of sustained remission of depression was just 2.7%. Here's another one. Antidepressants are barely distinguishable from a placebo, dummy pill, when it comes to treating depression. And as you can see, there are many more reports, and again, I urge you to look through them. So again, you have a great deal of documentation on the very adverse side effects of these drugs, and you have studies showing that only 2.7% of people on these drugs actually sustained remission of depression, and many had no effect beyond placebo effect. And yet, they are still being prescribed in massive quantities, generally as a first line of treatment, but this is not treatment, it's drugging. There are quite a few other simple forms of treatment that have also been documented and proven to be effective without such dangerous side effects, such as exercise, changes in diet, social connection, getting adequate sleep, attending religious services, and even listening to music. Here is a list of some of those studies. The largest synthesis of data to date from research studies on the effect of exercise on depression found that exercise is as effective as antidepressant drugs or psychotherapy and should be offered as an evidence-based treatment option. A recent study concluded that changing to a healthy Mediterranean-style diet substantially improved even severe depression symptoms. On social connections, here's what the U.S. Surgeon General says. Given the totality of the evidence, social connection may be one of the strongest protective factors against self-harm and suicide among people with and without serious underlying mental health challenges. On sleep, adults sleeping less than 7 hours per night on a regular basis is associated with adverse health outcomes, including depression. Infants, children, and adolescents who do not get sufficient sleep are at increased risk for poor mental health and attention and behavior problems. On attending religious services, this study indicates that non-religious adolescents may have lower mental well-being scores when compared with their more religious peers, irrespective of religious denomination. And then I thought I'd add one that I especially like. Music therapy as an alternative treatment for ADHD children and adolescents showed positive neurophysiological and psychological effects. Therefore, the study proposed using music therapy as an alternative to medicine for preventing and treating depression. And I would like to circle back to an important topic. Again, high-profile tragic mass shootings. Congress calls for increased gun control. So instead of targeting the guns, I would like Congress to increase control and limitations on the prescribing of these dangerous antidepressant drugs. And this leads into the topic of red flag laws. In the United States, a red flag law is a gun violence prevention law that permits a state court to order the temporary removal of firearms from a person who they believe may present a danger to others or themselves. At first glance, this seems pretty reasonable. Of course, you don't want somebody that looks like they're going to harm themselves or others to do that with a firearm. However, here's where there could be potential abuse of this zone. The American Psychiatric Association, APA, has a manual called the DSM. Now it's DSM-5, which means the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, including such things as ADHD, nicotine withdrawal disorder, various phobias including fear of spiders, dyscalculia, an impediment in mathematics, and separation anxiety frequently develops after a distressing event, especially the loss of a loved one or a divorce, and hundreds more. The caution in this is that anything on this list labels you as a person with a mental disorder. Where this could be abused with red flag laws is that if you have a mental disorder, should you have the right to carry a firearm? Well, when such things as mathematics impediment and fear of spiders are on that list, it gets a little out of control. Also, it should be noted that many psychiatrists have spoken openly about disagreements on how these disorders actually get onto this list. And here's a clip of that in their own words.
DSM is made up by committees of men who have political opinion, and women too, who have biases and political opinions. And so there isn't nearly as much science in DSM as there ought to be.
Like in the previous one, people had a meeting in the bathroom and they decided that something should be in there, and then they would go and propose it to the whole committee.
You have this kind of lumping together of several observations, and when you get enough of them in one tent, you got a diagnosis.
DSM system is not the real system of the diagnosis.
A lot of the disorders that are in there haven't necessarily been rigorously validated.
It's just the best tool that we have available, but it is not perfect.
It's so useless that if you give me a patient and the DSM, I'll make at least 20 diagnoses on the same patient.
You have to take it with a grain of salt anyway.
It's actually getting more and more complicated.
We're left with diagnosing things on the basis of checklists and questionnaires, which leaves us sort of out of, as you said, the rest of medicine because we don't have a biological test.
Amazing.
The lack of science in the DSM is actually an open secret. Here's what some professionals have to say about it.
The DSM is a sham. It's been described as a house of cards. Why? Because the diagnoses are theoretical. They're not based on scientific measurements.
It's sort of a shaky level built on another shaky level, built on another shaky level.
It is flimsy and that it is easily collapsible under the scrutiny of critical thinking.
If you just pull one little fragment of the reasoning aside and question it thoroughly, you'll find it doesn't stand up, and then that means that the whole organism collapses because you've got some wrong premises in there somewhere. In fact, they're all over the place.
It is indeed a house of cards because it's predicated on not a solid structure. It is built to create an apparently legitimate edifice, which results in a diagnosis. But any serious inquiry will show it to be illegitimate.
And of course, I advise you to watch this video in its entirety, and I urge legislators to investigate how easily these disorders are added and removed from the DSM, as each one can then come with a treatment plan, including prescribed drugs, many of which can be easily billed to insurance companies. And I'd like to bring to light another topic that gets into a bit of a slippery slope. So, we have psychiatrists in their own field stating that they don't entirely agree with the way disorders are added to the DSM. Yet, almost 300 mental disorders are currently on the DSM list, any one of which can be prescribed treatment plans, potentially including antidepressant drugs. And now you see that antidepressants have dangerous side effects. Well, lest anyone who agrees with these findings should then try to infringe upon citizens' Second Amendment rights even more by stating these drugs are dangerous and anyone on antidepressants should not have guns. That is again not getting directly to the problem and using another angle to strip Americans of their constitutional rights. Approximately 45 million Americans are on SSRIs, and most certainly not all of them act violently, but there still should be investigations on those who have acted violently, and findings should be reported on what they had in their systems and what type of treatments they were receiving, as clearly they didn't work. The extreme idea of taking firearms away from all citizens on SSRIs is not the answer. Getting to the root of how these drugs adversely affect people and taking regulatory actions against these drugs is the real answer. So that's the fear regarding the vast diagnosis of mental disorders, the topic of SSRIs, and the potential usage of these against firearm owners. Obviously, people do go through emotional hardships. If someone has a great loss or a breakup, they are probably going to feel upset for a bit. In that time period, if they temporarily don't feel stable, maybe it's best that they don't have their firearms nearby. But in the 2A or Second Amendment community, it is not seen as the best solution for firearms per red flag laws to be removed by police officers, where it is unknown when the person will get them back, because now that person might be labeled with a mental disorder. There is another fear, that if someone actually states that they are having a mental health crisis, under red flag laws, the police can come to take away their weapons, and they may not get them back for an unspecified amount of time. Because of this, sometimes people that should report that they are having troubles don't, which could lead to unfortunate circumstances. As an alternative to police seizure of weapons, there is another organization called Hold My Guns. It is set up so that people who are experiencing a mental health crisis can contact them or have friends or family contact them to provide private off-site storage options through a national network of partners, meaning they can have their guns removed and stored safely in another location until the time when the person feels that they are better and not a threat to themselves or to others. It is found that people who are suffering a mental disturbance are more willing to use alternatives like Hold My Guns, which could greatly reduce potential harm to themselves or others. This is one of many examples of how the firearms community is looking for workable solutions in times of mental crisis. That website is holdmyguns.org. In summary, I hope you find this information as compelling as I do. Rather than strip Americans of their Second Amendment rights, I would urge those that are in legislative positions to seriously look into and take regulatory measures upon the American Psychiatric Association, the DSM, and the ever-increasing rate of antidepressant prescriptions going on in America, even though these drugs are documented to have dangerous and even deadly side effects. This is where we need more legislation and increased control. Mental health care budgets and research should be redirected to finding other, more useful alternative treatments and solutions, such as changes to a person's environment, especially where negative relationships are involved, changes in diet, exercise, handling vitamin deficiencies, various religious and philosophic studies, participation in uplifting social activities, and other treatments already listed above and statistically proven to be beneficial. Thank you very much.